Okay, Gabby, introduce yourself.
My name is Gabrielle Harcourt. I'm many things. I'm a motion graphics artist for broadcast television. I'm a painter. I draw. I like to express myself creatively in any way possible, and that can come about in all sorts of ways, and usually it's in the moment. It might be a friend asking me to help them out with their kid's birthday party, and I have to think creatively in that way. It might be at work where I'm asked to break down a complex story and to make it visually beautiful and appealing. Or it might be exploring materials or wood or sculpture. So I'll just say I'm a creative.
And how did you get your start in your art journey?
Well, I think art was something that I was always encouraged to do from a very young age. It was something that, because I got a lot of positive feedback for with just my little drawings and my little paintings, I ended up having a confidence around just diving in and just going for it. So when I was in year 10, my grades were terrible. I was never really very good at school. And the school sat me down and said, look, we're really sorry, but we think we need to ask you to leave. And it was very devastating at the time because I wanted to complete my schooling and do my year 11 and 12, and to think that I couldn't do that was horrible. And they said, well, we've got a little job for you working at Miss Maud's, which was like a pie store where you dress like a German chick and you're like, you want some pie? And, and I was like, okay, I'll think about it. But then I had a good chat with my mum, and we decided that I could apply for TAFE and study art because it was something that I was always interested in. And when I went and I did my first year at 16, it was so interesting because I realized it wasn't that I was not intelligent. It's just that I needed something that really feeded my soul and fulfilled me, for me to take interest and to want to know how it works and how it all comes together. And we had plenty of freedom at this particular art school. So I just started to muck around and be more in a sense of play with it. And I did a bit of art, I did a bit of fashion, I did a bit of traveling. And then when I came back from my travels at about 22, I decided, okay, I'm interested in art, but I don't think I can just be an artist and make a living. So I came to the conclusion that I should give graphic design a go, and just see, because I really loved painting on the computer as well, and using Photoshop to create images. And I was happy to add a technological component and have that as just sort of another medium. So I went to uni and I actually did quite well. And it was just so interesting to see that, because I'd always had the same narrative, because I couldn't do school very well, that maybe there was something wrong. But I really thrived at uni. And in I think it was my first year, Channel 9 picked me up to do the Photoshop images that go behind the newsreader. So I was so excited because it was television. I was like, oh, show business. Hollywood, okay. And it was this crazy old studio in Perth where I grew up and where I lived. And when I first arrived there, they had this helicopter, they had a helipad, and the helicopter was taking off. And, it was just so... It was straight from the 50s, lots of old TV sets and lots of rooms with just old school cameras. And I just found it fascinating, a fascinating place to work there. And you had so many unusual characters as well. Like everybody there kind of found their way there in unusual ways. You had, guys from audio that had been musicians their whole life, and now they were doing this, and big like larger than life personalities. So it was funny because I felt like it was the first job I really belonged at, and I loved going to all the different departments, to the cameramen, to the journalists, to I was in the graphics department, and just finding out how they did their jobs and how it all worked. I found it so fascinating. So I did well there, and I've been working there ever since.
Your experience at high school, you mentioned kind of like you felt like maybe you weren't smart or anything like that. Is that something that has been a problem as you've gone on as well, like through the art career, or have you managed to drop that?
Well, it was interesting because when I first arrived at 9, the guys I were working with were incredibly intelligent guys, and they could really understand how a computer works, and they could be artistic, but they could also, break down how physics. We were doing animation, how do things move? And I realized I could never truly get a grasp on that. And I realized that I just learnt differently. So there's still that feeling in me sometimes. There are just certain things that I'm like, I know I can't understand that off the bat. It's not like that. But I also feel that inverts into a different type of intelligence where I built my graphics very differently. I focused on how they looked and what was eye-catching, and then I would go into the detail and slowly sort of learn about it in that way. So it's definitely been something that I've carried for a long time. But I feel that as my life goes on and as I start exploring more creatively, I am able to kind of let that go and just accept that, okay, like I have a different type of intelligence here, and it's something that people seem to really appreciate and respond well to. And I think that when we're at school, we very much value maths and we very much value English, as we should. But it's just hard if those things don't come to you easily, or if the style of learning isn't how you can understand, then you can feel that maybe there isn't a place in the world for you, and it can be quite you think, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to function in this world that needs you to have certain types of skill sets to be able to even just get into uni, or to get a job. So it's it's stressful as a young person, but interestingly, I think my creativity really helped me be able to find my way without needing to necessarily rely on some of the skills that are sort of more privileged than others. I found that my conversation style skills really helped quite a lot. I was able to connect with people at my work from all over, all different types of people, and that really helped my career to be able to connect with people. And they were happy. If I got the graphics out and I did the job, they were happy. But I think that they very much valued somebody that they could talk to as well, and someone that they could have a laugh with. And I think that's something that we often forget, that's just as important sometimes. Yeah. You want someone who you can work with, who's easygoing and friendly and gives, has a passion for people, really. And who gives them a chance to be who they are authentically.
It's a bit sad that your school missed that, your high school. Missed all that. Told you to work in a bakery.
But I mean, it's really hard at school because I've got so many kids that they're trying to get through a system, and obviously, you know, we quantify everything, and it's all based on numbers and how well you do, and what grade did you get, and you're able to be a sort of a number, and it's like, okay, you know, student number 1, this is their grade, student number 2, that's their grade, and it's a tool to help people and to help our society, but it's when you slip through the cracks, and there's many kids who do, they feel that they don't have a place, and they're left sort of wandering around. And I think that we're not sort of taught to have that self-confidence and that self-belief, and to find out who you are, and we're not given that space to really have that self-exploration. And you know, we've got to, I guess, work, and we've got to have housing, and we've got to, you know, this is just our society now. So it can be a very confusing space when maybe you feel the skill sets you have aren't going to attribute to you being able to even live basically, you know? Yeah.
Tell me about your personal art. We've talked a bit about your professional life at Channel 9.
Yeah.
What do you... Sorry, I got distracted there by something.
Oh, that's okay.
What do you work on for your personal projects and your kind of purely creative expressions?
Well, at the moment, my focus is painting, and I started painting a little bit more seriously in the last few years. I've always painted, I've always drawn, but recently I think that I wanted to return to painting in a more consistent way. So one of the paintings that I started doing was of a woman, and I probably started that painting in 2020, and I found that her face just kept changing. You know, I was never quite satisfied with the face, and I didn't know what I was necessarily going for. Was I going for realism or abstract? I'm not sure, but the important thing was I was just giving it a go, and eventually a face did form. And now when I look at this particular painting, it's a painting of a woman. She has blue skin. She has a snake around her neck and a crown on her head. And I didn't necessarily plan that. I wasn't like, oh yeah, and I'm going to do this awesome ass snake and a crown. Like, it wasn't like this whole, all right, like, let's do it like this. It just kind of came naturally, you know, just playing with shapes, playing with color. And it's an interesting one because I see this sort of responsibility in the expression on the face that I painted. And it just got me curious as to, she looked like she was carrying the world on her shoulders, and I wondered where that came from and if that's coming from a place within me. So I started to just use as much color as I possibly could, and I would buy canvases, and I have a good room for painting. It's a nice big room, and I just had my paints out all the time and canvases everywhere. And I noticed, like, I would never really finish a painting. I would kind of start one and then stop. And I think that it was about whether I had creative flow or not, you know, whether if I felt blocked or if I felt like life was taking over and I was getting overwhelmed, that I wouldn't really paint. But if I could give myself a day to sit and paint, once I got the water and the paint, then I'll just keep going and I won't stop. So I really started to paint in this type of style of just painting women, I would say.
Is it the one woman that you keep painting over and over, or is it different? And I'm getting this is all from your mind.
Well, initially it was. I did 2 paintings, and it was the same woman. And then I started to do more, and it became different women. I always think I draw women who have a strength about them. I think that to be strong is to be vulnerable. And I think that that's what my paintings evoke. There's a strength and a vulnerability at the same time. And it's a really strange process when you sort of paint and then you take a step back and you look back at your own painting, especially drawing a face. Because depending on what lens you're looking through in life, you will see different things. And I've had friends or family look at my paintings and they've all seen, or it's all spoken to them in different ways. I had one particular painting I did, and I did it very quickly, and I just called it Girl on the Chair. And it's just a girl kind of crouched in a very graphic style, kind of very expression, sort of quick kind of style of painting. And she just looks really quite sad. And I was amazed at how many people responded to that and how many people reached out and said that they would actually like to have that painting. And what it told me was that at the moment, I think that people are going through a really hard time. And I know that we always, as humans, have been going through difficult times. But I think that the distractions that we kind of set up around us don't quite hit like they used to. And I think that's why people responded to that painting so much. And if I can sort of put that out there, this is how I'm feeling, then others can have that space to say, I'm feeling the same way.
Do you think that maybe these paintings of women are kind of maybe self-portraits? That's kind of what rings a little bell in my head.
I sometimes wonder if they're almost, they are, and then they could also be my ancestors. Some of the women look like they have African descent, and I know with my background, that's there's certain regions that that I've come from, Nigeria, and then Costa Rica, Jamaica. I'm mixed, and I find that my paintings look a little bit more like a little bit more less mixed, if I can say that. So, but I think when it comes to their expressions, then it is a self-portrait. Yeah. So I might think I'm drawing somebody else, but the heart and soul is probably me. Yeah.
Is there an interest in mythology as well there?
Well, I find it interesting that for a while I was painting people blue, and I don't know how it works when you're picking colors, because when I'm in the process, it's organic. I'm not trying to, I don't look into color theory, and I'm not trying to, just kind of, I pick what I feel. And I have looked into it a little bit. Blue can symbolize a lot. I know you can have like Indian goddesses that had blue skin, I can't even remember. There was a few other associations with the color blue, but to me it actually symbolized power. Maybe there's something about feeling powerless and imagining a woman with power who really felt her power.
What kind of art do you like to look at?
It's so interesting because I love to look at art. There's the type of art I love that I think really adds to a space. Something that is bright, colorful, abstract, that gives like that space maybe a bit of a tongue-in-cheekness or a bit of beauty that it might not have. So there's that kind of maybe more surface level art that I love, and which I like to make too. But then when I think about art that I follow and that I take interest in, it usually has a bit of a dark connotation to it. Artists that can paint something that tells a bit of a story or that has lots of detail, and that comes from maybe a place within them that could be like an unhealed place or an unwhole place, and expressing that through art is a way of processing and a way of healing. So I find that darkness quite interesting, and even in other forms, in movies or in music, I tend to seek out a little bit of the morbid sometimes, but in a way that is subconscious, not such an obvious thing that is tragic, more something that makes you think, or that evokes kind of a part of you where you know it's almost a communication, an understanding.
You mentioned the word, I think, a couple of times, subconscious. What part do you think subconscious plays in creativity? Is that where you think your creativity comes from the subconscious? Do you think it can be a conscious thing? Dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I always think about the subconscious because I have a mind, a very powerful mind that is constantly thinking, and it's always, telling me things, and it's creative, yes. And then a lot of the time when I'm doing that in that creative space, it's not so much the mind. It's coming from somewhere that I can't actually see. I can't see where it's coming from. I can't explain it sometimes. And it's not as easy as saying, like, I wanted to draw a woman, so I drew a woman, and that's that. It's more of a, why did I paint it in this style? Why does it seem that there's a consistency or a theme here? And what does that mean? Especially as I've been doing this since I was 3 years old. I've been always sort of drawing in a particular way, and I wasn't told to draw or taught to draw. It just came from somewhere. And I think that a lot of the time, it's like when you dream, a lot of the time, you can't really make sense of it. But you can also get the feeling that it's telling you something. And I think that I would like to continue to bring the subconscious conscious. And I think that that's something that happens forever, and that we're always doing certain patterns and behaviors that we're unconscious of. And through creativity, it can kind of map that out a little bit.
Like a manifestation of the subconscious.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so if I draw something super quickly, it seems random to me, but I have an inkling that it's not random, and that it comes from somewhere. And I think that we can have family histories, or we can inherit things from our parents. We can take on other people's fears or conditioning over time, and not realize that it's there, or that it's something that could be explored, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Your workspace, that's at home? Do you work from home, or do you have a studio?
We have a studio. We have a studio in Docklands. So I initially, I was working in Perth, and then I flew over in 2019 to transfer. And it's a great studio. It's sort of a modern office building that they converted into a studio. And there is something really nice about working in broadcast television, because it's kind of, am I allowed to say, a bit of a dying art form? I don't know if I should say that, because I would hope that it's not. But nowadays with streaming services, you don't need to wait for your show to come on at that particular time. But it's a live show. And people who work there are very, very passionate about that. And, I'll come in at around 9:30 and meet with producers and journalists, and they'll explain, okay, let me say this in a very simple way. They'll say, okay, a cat's caught up a tree. Usually it's not that. But just say it as an example. A cat's caught up a tree. We need to do a map, or we need to do a recreation, or we need to explain how this happened. And then it's my job to be able to think of a creative animation I can do to be able to explain the story, to go to air that night.
How long do you get?
We have news at 4 and 6, so it has to be done in the day. So we animate using Adobe software. We have Photoshop and After Effects, and we've got 3D software, Blender. And we can... after a while, you sort of get into the rhythm of, okay, how can I make this story kind of pop a little bit? Because a lot of the time we might be talking about, I don't know, interest rates or something, and we need to explain how it works, and we'll get a voiceover from the journalist and we'll put it into the software, and then they'll give us the information of what they want to highlight, and then it's up to us, what colors you want to use, what style, and we'll animate to their voice. So I slowly learned how to animate on the job. I started, like I said, just doing the behind the newsreader images. And I remember it started to get to a point where they were using less and less of those and more animation. And as the technology became more available, amazing animation technology, they wanted to rely on that more for storytelling. And it works great. It works great in movies and documentaries to be able to have an animated component, because it really helps visualize and simplify what you're trying to say. And, it's artistic too, depending on the colors you use and the textures and the mood. So I got to a point where I just thought, I really don't want to learn how to animate. It just looked so hard. It just, oh my, I was watching the guys do it, and, I just thought, no way could I ever do that. And then it was like a survival situation. I'm like, well, do you want to keep working? I'm like, I don't want to go back to Miss Maud's. And I slowly, painstakingly, and it was terrible. It was terrible for me. It was terrible for everyone else, because they said, okay, this is the animation you need to do by 6 o'clock tonight, and I don't know how to animate. And then I somehow pull together this thing, asking everyone for all the help in the world to help me kind of understand. And then there was just this turning point. And I think the turning point happened when I started to finally see other artists who were in this line of work that I truly respected. Because at the time, I didn't really know any resources of what to look at. And I was just going based on my own work. I'm like, okay, here's some stats and here's a person, and it would come up, and I don't know, it didn't look very visually appealing. And then I remember finding a artist called, I think his name is Patrick Clare, and he does a lot of, he used to actually have the same job, and he ended up doing a lot of beautiful opening title sequences for a lot of TV shows. And he did, he used just very creative techniques, and I would say a lot of the time, even in his early work, you would see that he would have two meanings to kind of create the one story. So he might go zoom in and show a stat and show more stats, and then the camera would pull out and it would be a skull. He was doing things that were just different, and the graphics were beautiful as well. So I found his page, and I was just becoming more inspired. And I thought, I've always been interested in movie making, and there's a beauty to that. There is an art to it. And I think that when I was able to apply kind of my artistry to the job, that's when things clicked and I started to get excited about it. So I kind of had to find the thing that made it me, and the thing that kind of took away the technical side and got me more into, well, like, what am I trying to express here, and play around with the software in that way. Yeah.
I'm curious about whether you get that creative satisfaction from the motion graphic work, because it sounds like a really fast-paced environment. It almost sounds like the opposite to the world of your painting.
Yes.
Sort of thing where a lot of things are done by feel.
Yes.
And all that. And I guess, are you able to get that creative satisfaction from the motion graphics work that you do?
I'm actually quite lucky that they give us a lot of freedom in how we build the graphics. There are certain graphics that, if they want to do a Facebook post or something from Twitter, then yeah, it's gonna be pretty generic looking. But certain stories, like if we're doing a story about a murder, for example, and you think about a documentary you've seen, like a crime documentary you've seen, and how they've had to use a lot of mood and tone to be able to evoke what that person or what their family went through, or what happened at the time, and in that space, then I am able to bring forward a lot of my creativity. But it's from job to job, and I also have the acceptance that work can't always be this 100% creative space. What work, this kind of, like, I'm lucky that I'm able to be creative in my line of work, but I also find that having the groundedness of going somewhere each and every day, the same place with a good team that support you, really gives me structure, and that I need a little bit of that. And it's not completely the other end where I'm not doing taxes or anything. I'm still able to, keep it creative enough. But when I think to myself, would I rather be doing something that is purely creative? Well, yes, I would, but I would still need to have some sort of structure there. And that's what this place has given me. And what I find interesting is that it's actually taught me skills that I would have never seeked out on my own. I had to be put in that pressure cooker environment to be able to really thrive. And I think now, if I wanted to shoot a movie, or if I wanted to do graphic design for a brand, or, I can use all of these skill sets I have now, film, or even the way that scripts are written, and it or just being able to walk into any room, because you have a lot of, like I said, big personalities. You've got people who have been on TV for a long time. And it taught me to not be intimidated in those spaces. So going in there at 24, and I couldn't even make a phone call, to now being able to have a meeting and talk to everybody equally, and not feel I need to diminish myself in any way. That was a skill that I learned from working in such a high stress environment.
Your painting studio. So where do you paint? Obviously not at Channel 9.
No, I wish they'd let me paint there though. I paint at home, actually. I have a very beautiful house that there's a non-for-profit organization called IOFC, and they own this beautiful home. That was actually gifted to them in the 50s by a philanthropist. And he thought that their charity was, I think he said, a place of light in a very dark world. And I was brought there just through a friend. And I really loved the stuff that they were doing. They, at the moment, they're working with First Nations people to try and push the yes vote. And I just loved their work. So I was volunteering, and I ended up being able to get a room there. And there's a lot of creatives that live there and that are in that space. And my room was just big enough for me to be able to paint. And they're highly encouraging of using your creativity, and they do a lot of shows and programs. And I did a show last year with them called Creative You, and we all got together and built this sort of art project that was so it was just so in line with how I like to work, where you're calling people, you're bringing them to the house, you've got a good sense of community, and then you're being creative together, you know. And then at the end, you know, we had people come and view the show and look at the artwork that we'd created. So living in that house has given me a really good balance from my work life, because I feel that house really allows me to be who I am. And a lot of the people who volunteer there and who live there are passionate about trauma healing as well. And I think that has a huge influence on how we're creative. I think a lot of creatives, they have had suffering in some way. And I think it's coming from being a sensitive person. And being sensitive can be looked down upon. You know, you're not someone who can hold it in or can appear as strong. But it also makes you sensitive to other things like light and shade and color and shape, and it gives you this uniqueness. So I think sometimes you can't have one without the other. I think this isn't for everybody, obviously, but I think for a lot of my friends who are creatives as well, they draw from, they can draw from darker places within them. And like I was talking about before, places that might not be healed, to be able to use that in a way that gives you kind of a visual story, however that may be, you know. Yeah.
Does that get a bit much for you sometimes, being around that a lot? Can that become a bit overwhelming?
It can be. It can be very overwhelming, because sometimes I feel like I'm working on it every single day. Like I'm working on trying to be a better person every single day, or working on trying to understand or feel something. And then you have times where you just think, I just want to be numb from this, and I want to be someone who is satisfied with who they are, and just, you know, goes about their day and can, I don't know, whatever the distraction is, whether it's sit and watch TV all day or, you know, whatever. And I have days like that too. But it can be tough, as it can. Yeah, because we are constantly having conversations around these things. But I think that it's always the hard part, to opt into that and to opt into how you're truly feeling. It's way easier to go into story in your mind and just, I don't know, not take responsibility or blame or go into hatred or go into, you know, rather than just sitting with what you're actually feeling. It's harder to sit with what you're actually feeling. It's way harder to do that. And it's day by day, I guess. Yeah.
Well, one last question.
Yes.
It might take a while to answer this. What role do you see art and artists playing in the future? Like, there's so much uncertainty that lies ahead of us. What role do you think art can and should play?
Art, to me, takes us temporarily out of whatever the ideology of the time is, whatever the social structures of the time are, whatever the culture of the time is. I feel that art can give you space from that, if that makes sense. And in whatever form that takes, because it's hard to know in the future with different types of technological mediums that are coming up. It's hard to know where art will go, maybe as an industry. But I think when it comes to self-expression, it's always going to be a form of communication through something that is creative, that is manifested, that is created. So the role, I think, will stay the same. The role will stay the same. The mediums might change, but the space that an art piece can give your mind when you see something that truly communicates with you, and it's not communicating with language necessarily, it's a different type of communication. I think that will always be there as long as people continue to allow themselves to go to those vulnerable places and express themselves in that way. And I think that's why there are artists in the first place. That's their role. That's what they take on, is to do that, you know. So yeah, I don't think it'll necessarily change. I just hope that there's societally we always just allow as much space as possible for that. Yeah.
Well, Gabrielle, thank you for coming along and sharing your thoughts.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.